Okay, good afternoon, everybody, and welcome to COSSA Headlines. For those who haven't participated before, welcome. Each month we host these webinars and we briefly run down the top social science news from the past month. We then spend a little bit more time having an in-depth conversation on a particular timely topic, and then we'll leave you with some homework so that you can take action in the next month to help us advance the social sciences. This month, our deep dive is going to focus on the 2020 census and the ongoing battle over the citizenship question. I'm Julia Milton, and I'm COSSA's Director of Public Affairs, and I'll be running through the headlines and moderating the conversation later. And I'm really happy to be joined by Ron Wasserstein, the Executive Director of the American Statistical Association, who will be helping us to understand what the heck is happening with the census. As a reminder, COSSA Headlines is a members-only benefit, which means you're participating today as a member of one of our governing associations or as a member of one of our non-governing members. We find that the best way for people to get involved in COSSA's activities has always been through word of mouth. So we always ask that you share our resources and notices about headlines and other emails we send with your colleagues, both inside and outside your organization. We'll be stopping several times during the webinar to answer questions that you might have, and you can ask at any time using the chat function on your screen, and we'll also allow you to raise your hand and ask with your voice at particular moments in the webinar. So let's turn to this month's headlines. In Congress, we're about halfway through the appropriations process with only about 2.5 months left before the end of the fiscal year. The House has currently passed 10 of its 12 appropriations bills for FY 2020, only leaving Homeland Security and the legislative branch bills remaining, which means that the House has passed funding for agencies important for social science, including the NIH, NSF, the USDA, and so our analysis of those bills is on our website. Excuse me just a minute. Getting some feedback. Apologies for that. I can't sort it out. So, however, so the House has just 2 bills left, but the Senate hasn't considered any bills yet. And the Senate leadership says that they won't until they reach a top-line deal on funding levels before they actually start considering their fiscal year 2020 bills. So we're hoping to see some movement on that over the next month because time is going to run out quickly as we're heading into the fall, and we could face a government shutdown if we don't make more progress. Excuse me. So on June 14th, the White House released an executive order directing federal agencies to eliminate at least 1/3 of their advisory committees by October 2019 of this year. The executive order applies to committees established under the Federal Advisory Committee Act, or FACA, and the executive order exempts merit review panels and anything that's necessary for funding extramural research, but it does not exempt science advisory committees, which provide agency leaders with science advice and guidance. According to the order, agencies can seek waivers from the Director of the Office of Management and Budget if the committees are necessary for the delivery of essential services, for effective program delivery, or because it is otherwise warranted by the public interest. However, we're not sure how readily those waivers will be granted. And so this is something we're going to be monitoring over the next couple of months, and we'll be reporting back on any moves to eliminate advisory committees that are important to the social science community. The White House Office of Science and Technology Policy is seeking input on the national research strategy portion of the President's Roadmap to Empower Veterans and End the National Tragedy of Suicide, which helpfully spells prevents. OSTP is hoping to coordinate research both inside and outside the government and enhance cross-disciplinary research into the social, behavioral, and biological determinants of wellness and brain health. The specific questions they're hoping to get input on are available on the link on your screen, and we'll send the slides around tomorrow so you don't have to worry about typing all of that out. But it includes questions like, how can we better identify those at risk for suicide? How can we develop interventions to prevent suicide and increase the quality of life for veterans? and what the government can do to facilitate sharing data, coordinating research efforts, and translating and implementing findings. The deadline for responding to this request is on Monday, July 15th. So if you have anything you'd like to let them know, now's the time. There's a lot going on in artificial intelligence right now. The Select Committee on Artificial Intelligence of the National Science and Technology Council, or NSTC, has released an update to its artificial intelligence research and development plan. It was originally released in 2016, and the update includes new strategic priorities that include making long-term investments in AI research, developing effective methods for human-AI collaboration, understanding and addressing the ethical, legal, and societal implications of AI, developing shared public data sets and environments for AI training and testing, and expanding public-private partnerships to accelerate advances in AI. This is a big priority for the Trump administration, and there's a lot of movement happening in different areas on this issue. The House Science Committee is also focused on AI and plans to take up legislation sometime soon. They held a hearing on June 26th that focused on the societal and ethical implications of artificial intelligence, which obviously includes a lot of social science related areas. We have a summary of the hearing on the COSSA website as well. And you may have heard us mention this before, but the NIH Office of Behavioral and Social Sciences Research is seeking examples of noteworthy advances in health that would not have been possible without the behavioral and social sciences. They're looking to build as broad a list as possible. Achievements don't have to have been funded by NIH or represent recent advances. The deadline to submit is the end of this month, and they're using a crowdsourcing platform so you can see the submissions that have already been sent in and vote on them. So I encourage you to go to the link on your screen and check out what has been submitted so far. The census continues. The citizenship question legal battle is ongoing, and I am not going to get into it, thank goodness, because I have Ron for that. There's a new National Academies report on monitoring educational equity. It proposes a system of indicators of educational equity and recommendations for implementation. It also is intended to help policymakers better understand and prevent disparities in the education system. The deadline for a number of AAAS awards to nominate candidates is approaching on August 1st. They include awards for mentorship, public engagement, science diplomacy, scientific freedom and responsibility, science journalism, and a specific award for the behavioral sciences. So check those out. You can find more information about all of the individual awards and how to nominate candidates on the website on your screen. In COSSA news, we've officially announced the date for next year's Social Science Advocacy Day, so mark your calendars for March 30th and 31st. We are continuing to seek submissions of stories of social science successes that we use for our materials and advocacy to policymakers. We have a form on our website, and we're looking for just about anything that can help us better communicate the value of social science and federal research investment. And lastly, if you missed our most recent Why Social Science post, I highly encourage you to read it. It's from two communication researchers who focus on veterans reintegrating into their communities. Is a really interesting look at a lot of different areas in which the social sciences have contributed to helping members of the military both during and after this service. All of this information and more is probably already in your inbox in our biweekly newsletter, the COSSA Washington Update. If others in your organization would like to get our emails, please encourage them to visit the link on your screen and sign up for them. So I will pause briefly for questions. You can use the chat box on your screen if you have any, and we'll also stop again later in the webinar to talk more about the census and answer your census questions. Okay, I'm not seeing any questions, so I'm going to turn it over to Ron, who is going to help us make sense of what is happening with the census and the citizenship question.
All right, thank you, Julia, and thank you everyone for joining this afternoon. Let me just make it clear that I'm not an expert on the census. I've I've never worked at the Census Bureau. I'm not even a survey methodologist. I've never played a census expert on TV, and I did not sleep at a Holiday Inn Express last night. And be interested to know how many of you on this webinar remember those old Holiday Inn Express commercials last night. I bet the Julia and Camille, who are here at COSSA, they're blessed with too much youth to remember those commercials, but some of you probably do remember them. However, I am an active advocate for the census, and I do have access to lots of experts and expertise, and I was foolish enough to say yes when asked to try to explain all this when Wendy asked, although I think we all thought that we would be in a very different place at this point in time than it turns out that we are. To be honest, it's hard to figure out where to start telling this story because it's so convoluted. In fact, the story is taking its next turn this very afternoon as the president is making some sort of announcement about it at 5 p.m. But I suppose the place to start is with the question itself. That is the citizenship question as proposed by the administration. It's the same as the question that appears on the American Community Survey. And don't stare too hard at this question yet. We'll come back to it in a minute. Let's take a step back, though, and try to see how we got to the point where COSSA wanted to have a deep dive on Census 2020 right now. Though this slide says how we got here, there are a lot of ways to look at that. This, of course, is my version of how we got here. It's told from the statistical point of view. Questions about citizenship have appeared on the census for a long time. The document you see on this slide was submitted to Congress in March 2018. Please make special note of that date. It's important in the telling of this particular story. In this document, the Commerce Department indicates the questions it intended to ask on the 2020 census and the American Community Survey. If you're not familiar with that latter document, the American Community Survey, that is, it is what took the place of what was called the long-form census. Starting with 2010, all of us received a census form that asks us just a very few questions: age, Hispanic origin, race, relationship, that is, to the person filling out the form, sex, tenure, that is, do we own or rent the place that we're in, some operational questions like how many others are living in the home, and so on. All the other stuff that used to be on the so-called long form is now on the ACS, which is a survey sent to about 3.5 million households each year. The ACS began being sent to individual units each year in 2005. All questions that will appear on the decennial census and the ACS are and must be approved by Congress. They must have a good reason for being asked. And so, as a sidebar here, when you hear your representatives complain about questions on the census or the ACS as being invasive or nosy, remember that those questions were approved by the legislature. We've asked about the citizenship of people filling out the long form or filling out the form for a long time. And the Commerce Department was careful to point this out in their document, as you can see here. The footnote, enlarged in this slide, says that it has been asked in 1820, 1830, 1870, and 1890 to the present. However, what it fails to mention specifically is that it has not been asked of every person since 1950. Since that time, the question has only appeared on the long form, and that means in recent times, it has only appeared on the American Community Survey. This gets to the heart of the issue, the first big problem that draws the attention of statisticians. When the Commerce Department came forward with this question in March 2018, it was no surprise that it would do so, but it came well after the time for adding new questions to the census. All questions on the census require strict testing. There are procedures required by law under such statutes as the Paperwork Reduction Act, the Information Quality Act, and the Administrative Procedure Act that require each question to be rigorously tested in the context of the full census itself. That is, it is not sufficient to just go out and try on a new question. The questions must be asked in the context of the full set of questions. Why? Because, in short, there is more than enough known in testing theory to recognize that throwing in a new question can change the way other questions are perceived. It is entirely possible that there would be no impact from adding the citizenship question. However, it is also very possible that adding such a question may have all sorts of problems that need to be corrected by adding instructions, training interviewers for follow-up, and so on. Does the question and its wording cover the many interpretations that are possible in the minds of the people reading it? Is a systematic misinterpretation possible? You don't know if you don't test. I'll take a moment here to go back to the hearings the House conducted on this topic back in March. In his opening statement, Ranking Committee member Jim Jordan claimed that the question had been tested because it had been tested and then used in the context of the American Community Survey. Testing in the context of one survey instrument is not the same as testing in the context of another. And the ACS is administered in an entirely different political climate than that of the census. Everyone gets the census. Only a small percentage of households get the ACS. And look at how politicized the census has become. We simply cannot assume that the question will be viewed on the census the same way it is viewed on the ACS. This leads directly to the second problem that concerns the American Statistical Association. The question will almost surely drive up the rate of non-response to the census. To understand that, let's talk briefly about how the census is conducted. Come April 1st of 2020, each household will receive the census form by mail. We will have a specific amount of time to return the census questionnaire. This time, for the first time, we can choose to go online to complete the census form for our households rather than mail it in, or of course we can still mail it in. Some number of us will not do either in the allocated amount of time. If not done by that certain amount of time, or if the form is incorrectly filled in certain ways, then the Census Bureau has to do what is called non-response follow-up, NRFU, or I believe it is referred to as NRFU. This is expected in a certain amount anyway. In 2010, about 1/4 of occupied housing units did not return mailed questionnaires, calling therefore for follow-up. This is, as I said, entirely expected and results in a huge mobilization effort, what a former Census Bureau director called the largest peacetime mobilization effort. What others have said makes the Census Bureau the world's largest temp agency during the census year. Hundreds of thousands of people have to be hired and trained to collect data from people who don't fill out the form. After all, there are about 135 million household units in the United States. So if even 1/4 do not respond, that's about 34 million households that have to be followed up on. Now, adding this citizenship question is going to drive more people to fail to respond. The Census Bureau's own research estimates conservatively guess that at least 3 million more households will fail to respond for this reason alone. These are the factors that drove the ASA to get involved. Our involvement included submitting an amicus brief along with COSSA members, the American Sociological Association, and the Population Association of America to several lower courts, including the Southern District of New York. Observe here on this slide that we argue, of course, that an accurate and reliable census is vital to the public interest. This is a good place for me to say that the ASA's position is that the citizenship question should not be on the 2020 census for statistical, not political reasons. The association has supported the work of the Census Bureau since the ASA was founded in 1839. Indeed, the ASA, the second oldest professional society in the United States, was originally founded to support the work of the Census Bureau. Had the citizenship question been tested, and if we knew that it would not greatly impact the response to the 2020 census, then we would not have gotten involved regardless of the political factors. That said, the political factors cannot easily be disentangled from the statistical ones. As you probably all know, the story of the citizenship question takes its real turn from the rationale for its placement on the census. The Commerce Department represented to Congress and to the courts that the Department of Justice requested that it put the question on the census to allow better enforcement of the Voting Rights Act. From the document detailing each question it planned to include on the 2020 census and the ACS, this is the page justifying the citizenship question. Note specifically this little paragraph, the little paragraph on the right-hand side here. Knowing how many people reside in the community and how many of those people are citizens, in combination with other information, this question, that is the citizenship question, provides the statistical information that helps the government enforce Section 2 of the Voting Rights Act and its protections against discrimination in voting. That's the end of the quote there. So from the statistical standpoint, to talk about this citizenship question mess, this whole imbroglio, it helps to understand something called citizen voting age population. Citizen voting age population, or CVAP, is just what it sounds like. It's the part of the voting age population that are citizens. So that's obviously a subset of the total population. So here you're looking at the current congressional districts of the Commonwealth of Virginia, and they're organized to have roughly equal total population. If Virginia or any other state were to organize its district by equal CVAP rather than equal total population, they would look differently, of course. Now, just for grins, here's the famously racially gerrymandered state of North Carolina. But even here, the districts are still organized by equal total population, just not fairly. Now, this map, by the way, doesn't fully do justice to the amount of gerrymandering done in the state of North Carolina. North Carolina districts 12, 1, and 4, for example, are considered 3 of the top 10 most gerrymandered districts in the United States. But anyway, back to topic. According to Secretary Ross in this memo here, the Department of Justice uses CVAP to prosecute violations of Section 2 of the Voting Rights Act, which section prevents discrimination on the basis of race, color, or membership in a language minority group. He claimed that the purpose of the addition of the citizenship question of the census was entirely for the purpose of improved enforcement of the Voting Rights Act. Now, I'm pretty sure I do not need to reenact for you at this point that several lower courts found that the Supreme Court concurred that this was a prevarication. That is, that the Department of Justice did not originally ask for this, but that Ross had sought the question be put on the census and then cast about for a reason to put it on, and landed on this particular reason. The DOJ had not asked for this information and does not really need it to help enforce the Voting Rights Act. In fact, as a point of information, the DOJ's website, Civil Rights section, under the voting section litigation, shows that the DOJ is bringing suit in Michigan under the Voting Rights Act and is using CVAP data from the American Community Survey to do so. In other words, we already have all the information we need from the American Community Survey to bring litigation under the Voting Rights Act. As you probably also very well know, the Supreme Court ruled that the administration can take another shot at coming up with a rationale for putting the citizenship question on the census. And the administration first indicated that it would not do so, but then President Trump said through a tweet, quote, "We are absolutely moving forward as we must because of the importance of the answer to this question." And so we have been in a state of chaos ever since, as we are today. I'd like to say more, though, about the statistical aspects of all this matter as it continues to go forward. First of all, as you may also be aware, shortly before the Supreme Court issued its ruling, new evidence was uncovered about the real motivations behind the reason for placing the question on the census, and it all goes back to CVAP. You're viewing a portion of the ruling of a case brought against the Commerce Department in Maryland District Court. Dr. Thomas Hofeller was a gifted drawer of maps, a charitable way of saying that he was a talented gerrymanderer who, over the course of a remarkable behind-the-scenes career, drew maps that built the Republican state majorities in Alabama, Texas, Pennsylvania, and Virginia that we know of. There may have been other states as well. In papers that were discovered after Dr. Hofeller's death, it became clear through a chain of evidence that the ultimate end of the citizenship question was to have sufficient data to provide citizen voting age population data to be able to redraw congressional districts all over the country. President Trump appears to have accidentally confirmed this recently as well, responding to reporters on July 5th, last Friday, as you see on this slide. Meanwhile, the printing of census forms is underway. The cost to the taxpayers to print the census forms and materials is a mere $114.5 million. And the process to print these forms is not a simple process either. Philip Bump in the Washington Post last Friday wrote this: "The government needs about 117 million English language questionnaires, each 8 pages long, 21 million bilingual questionnaires, each 16 pages long, 385 million single sheet letters, 273 million inserts, 209 million postcards, and 522 million envelopes of varying sizes. In total, it's 1.53 billion distinct pieces of material, and that's the finished product, including the various pages of the questionnaires that need to be produced. We're talking about more than 2 billion sheets of paper that need to be printed between now and the start of the census," end quote. So it's more than a little surprising when the president indicated that the citizenship question could still be included by the printing of an addendum. Yet the president seemed to be influenced by a number of factors, including conservative commentator Hugh Hewitt's Washington Post column, suggesting he could call for not one, but 3 census questions on the basis of an immediate need for more information that would provide data required to answer critical questions about Medicare for all. Hewitt suggested that Attorney General Barr immediately prepare an executive order for the president to sign with a stated rationale for any and all such new questions on the census, such as the president might need. Hewitt is completely oblivious to any issues the creation of such questions might have on the timing of the census, or the impact such questions might have on census response rates, census costs, and so on. As for the notion of an addendum, it is the ultimate untested census question or concept. There is no protocol for printing it, asking it, following up on it, and so on. It would be an absolute violation of the Administrative Procedure Act. At the moment, the matter is in court. Which court? Well, at least two. The case is being argued in the Southern District of New York, where the DOJ lawyers recently tried to quit, but Judge Furman would not let them. The case is also being heard in Judge Hazel's court in Maryland as well. So stay tuned. Further, if the president decides to go forward by executive order, my understanding, which is admittedly quite limited, is that the action would open up new litigation. It certainly fails the statistical criteria that I put forward earlier. Again, my understanding is very limited, but I hear that this in this afternoon's presentation by President Trump, that Attorney General Barr will be at his side. Article 1, Section 2, Part 3 of the Constitution, right near the bottom of this clip, states that the actual enumeration shall be made within 3 years after the first meeting of the Congress of the United States, and within every subsequent term of 10 years in such manner as they shall by law direct. As everyone on this webinar knows, an accurate and reliable count of the population of the United States is needed to allocate representation in the House and to distribute billions of dollars of revenue. The law requires that we count everyone to the best of our ability. The U.S. Census Bureau is committed to doing so, and for 180 years, the American Statistical Association has, among other things, supported that mission. We will continue to do so. From a statistical standpoint, the citizenship question does not belong on the 2020 census because it is untested, because it will lead to an unknown but very large non-response, and because of that, it will lead to a large undercount, particularly of specific populations. That this seems to be precisely the intention violates the ethical principles that statisticians hold themselves to, as outlined in the ASA Ethical Guidelines for Statistical Practice. Okay, thanks for listening to my deep dive. Hopefully it wasn't into the shallow end.
Thanks, Ron. Okay, so now we have some time for questions. There's a couple of ways that you can notify us that you have some. You can type them into the chat box on your screen. You can raise your hand. There's, I think, a button to do that, possibly right-clicking on your name. Or you could see if you're unmuted and just shout at us and we'll see what happens. So far I don't see any questions. I'm gonna give it another couple minutes. Oh, here is one. Here, the question is, do we know how an executive order can be prevented from going into effect?
So Ed, as far as I know, it would have to be through the courts. I don't know whether there's a legislative remedy or not.
And one question that I actually have for you, Ron, which you may or may not be able to answer, related to the courts, is the Supreme Court obviously decided on the census question on the last day of its term, and they're not expected to be back in session until October-ish. There's been some reporting that with a bunch of extra money and a lot of extra work, the census printing could be delayed as late as October 31st. But if the court is out of session, if these legal cases end up back at the Supreme Court, is there even any way that they would be able to consider them and rule on them?
So I'm really talking beyond my expertise. I just find it sort of baffling that the argument for the expedited process by which the court heard and ruled in the first place was that the the census had to have a ruling by June 30th so that it could get its work done, because it had to be done by June 30th. And now we're told that somehow, by some miracle and extra money and so on, well, maybe it could be done somehow by October 30th. That just seems impossible. But let me turn back to what I do know, at least a little bit about, supposedly anyway, which is the statistics of it. And just to say again that there is no process, there is no conceivable process by which there is a reasonable way that we can hope to properly test this so-called addendum idea. And I don't think anyone is even putting forward the idea of testing that. So I'll be real eager to see what is put forward at 5 o'clock today, because that just seems like, from a statistical standpoint, that we're just stepping past all of the safeguards that have been put in place to ensure that we have an accurate and reliable count of the number of people who live in the United States.
And I actually have another question, since I haven't seen any come in on the chat box. The census is currently testing a citizenship question right now, right? Isn't there some sort of test happening?
So there is an ongoing test. I haven't heard any more about that test recently, because all the chatter has been about everything else that's going on.
Yeah, things change every single day, so we'll all be glued to Twitter and the White House later this afternoon.
And of course, if there is anyone on this webinar who has information that I don't have, that wants to pop in with, drop in any information here to share with the rest of us, we're eager to know.
Yeah. So we will be sending the slides around, as well as a recording of the presentation. So those who want to share it with colleagues who weren't able to watch today will be able to have access to it. If there aren't any other questions, and I don't see any at the moment, I will give you your homework, which is not quite related to the census, because there's a lot of just waiting to be done. So I guess your census homework is to watch the news and see what happens at 5 o'clock today. But otherwise, respond to that OBSSR call for examples. Again, the deadline is the end of this month, and you can review what has already been submitted and vote on your favorites, and then take whatever you submit to OBSSR and share it with us as well, because we're always looking for new ways to talk about social science with policymakers, and different formulations of stories can resonate with different groups. And so there's an open call forever and always. Please tell us your stories about social science success. And lastly, keep an eye on our Action Center. This is where we post our active action alerts. If there's ever anything that we can do on the census or on NSF funding, that's going to be where we'll let you know how to take action. So watch that space, and we'll be in touch if and when we hear from the census. Okay, so mark your calendars for next month. Will be August 8th. We haven't fully decided on our deep dive topic, but we'll let you know once we decide what it's going to be. And you can always catch up on older headlines, webinars, by watching the recordings. They're all posted at the link on your screen. So thanks everybody for joining. You can reach out to us if you ever need. All of our emails are on the screen at COSSA. You can sign up to alerts by emailing me. You can have colleagues join COSSA through other organizations by emailing Wendy, and you can give us your ideas for deep dives in the future by emailing Camille. I hope you all have a great rest of your day, and we'll see you next month.